Welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg. We all know people who are self-centered and self-absorbed, maybe too many. But when do these traits actually meet the clinical definition of a narcissistic personality disorder? More importantly, how does one cope with a narcissistic spouse or relative, and can narcissism be treated effectively? With me to explore this today is Dr. Jim McGloin and Lesa Fischer, who between them have 50 years combined experience of treating personality disorders, which, by the way, narcissism is one. Thanks very much for being with us.
Sure, thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Is a person with narcissistic personality disorder just the extreme of a self-centered person, or is it something different?
I think it's an extreme, and it's also something different. So that if you think about there are only 1% of the general population that would qualify for a narcissistic personality disorder. But there are many features of narcissism that many people have. And the narcissism is a phenomenon that we can recognize in ourselves and others throughout society.
We're all a little narcissistic?
We can be, because it has a lot to do with being able to aim our interest and concern towards ourselves. Sometimes instead of or in addition to others.
Right.
Right. Well, what is a narcissistic personality disorder clinically? How do you know when you've got a bona fide disorder?
Well, the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, says that there are 9 criteria that you can look at to assess whether one has a narcissistic personality disorder, and some of those would include, duration and extent how they're featured, and so things like grandiose sense of self.
Yeah, they tend to glorify
Right.
themselves. It's a kind of self-infatuation, really.
Right.
Wow.
Difficulty demonstrating a sense of empathy. Or understanding of the other's point of view, any other's point of view.
And sometimes even caring about what other people
Yes.
think, because they don't listen to others, really. They listen only to themselves.
Wow.
And they don't feel compelled to do the right thing or to conform to convention or to society's rules. They make their own rules, in effect.
That's right. And so they also can demonstrate when someone doesn't agree with them or doesn't support the idea that they are the most important. They can demonstrate rage or a very definite kind of attack mentality towards the person
How
who
dare
might
you
disagree.
not think I'm the most important person in the
Yes.
world?
Yes, that's
Exactly,
right.
and it's very easy to get their feathers ruffled
Yes.
and to incite rage or stalking out of an important meeting and things like that.
Wow.
Now, it would be also, I think, fair to talk about the idea that there are some positive personality traits of somebody who is a narcissist. And those are important because they can be productive, right? They can be productive features, such as very driven, hardworking. They can be very engaging and very productive in drawing people in, and they're very lively.
They can be very visionary, the independent thinking and risk-taking is part of
Yes.
them. If you think about a productive narcissist,
Yes.
the productive, and many of them are great leaders and involved in the arts and all over our society, but things like passion and charisma and voracious learning and perseverance and alertness to threats and sense of humor.
Wow.
These are all the positive strengths that you get.
And their leadership qualities. So if you are connected with someone who's a narcissist and those features are presenting, if you are on a work team with them, for example, or you're on any kind of group with them, that can be a very positive experience for you, because when they're with you, if you're with them, then they know you're with them. And so that's fantastic, isn't it? That idea that sort of it's us and we're going to get a lot of that stuff done. Now, of course, the counter to that can be if at some point, which is probably going to happen, that you disagree or have a difference of opinion, there we go back to the danger that can turn into a sense of rage or a disengagement then from you.
It's because there's a bit of paranoia
That's
in them,
right.
which is that you're either with me or against me.
Right.
And so if you're not for the vision and for the mission, in effect, then you're out of here.
And then
you
you're
can be
not with
fired on
me.
the spot.
Yes.
Are you describing Steve Jobs?
Yes, he's one of
Yes.
them. He would be a productive narcissist.
Yes.
Steve Jobs, Bill Gates is another
Bill
example.
Gates?
Yes.
Yeah.
Many of our politicians If you think about that, sure, of
Leaders
course.
like Bill Clinton.
Yes.
Come on.
Even
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln,
Yes.
Winston
Wait,
Churchill,
no.
FDR.
Yes, it's
These are
true.
productive narcissists.
No.
Now, let me-
Yes.
And let me just speak to some of the weaknesses that these remarkable people have who have capacity to change the world.
I mean, I think you just lost credibility to all people who love Bill Clinton if you say he's a narcissistic. You mean literally an NPD, a narcissistic
Well, we won't
personality?
go so far as to say he's a narcissistic personality disorder, but that he has the type of personality which is
And
a narcissistic type.
And this would be a good time then to insert the idea that nobody is the entirety of what they present. And so, again, as you start out asking us what's the difference, there's lots of features that are demonstrated with some of these people we just mentioned. Bill Clinton, we can talk about that. There are lots of features demonstrated of narcissism. Is he have a narcissistic personality disorder on the diagnostic continuum? I don't know.
Yeah, let's not reduce people to their diagnostic
That's
labels
right.
or to say, anything
Right.
that we say about them doesn't say everything about anybody.
And that's true with any kind
But
of
you have
diagnosis.
in your office seen people that qualify
Yes.
for NPD.
Absolutely.
You don't know that Bill Clinton does.
That's right.
He
That's
just has
his-
some of the traits.
Yeah, he hasn't
As
been on
many
our
people.
couch, so
Yeah.
we don't know.
I haven't had the pleasure, but sure, yes.
Let me speak, if I could, a little bit to the weaknesses. I just listed a number of strengths and
Yeah.
a couple of people that have them, but weaknesses, they don't listen. They really don't listen to anybody but themselves. And actually, many of Shakespeare's main characters, only in their soliloquies, they overhear themselves, and they learn by listening to themselves.
Wow.
They don't listen to others, essentially. They're oversensitive to criticism, as we've mentioned. Their paranoia, the friend or foe, are you with me or against me? Anger and put downs, there's constant belittling. And if you come from a background and
They
you marry
belittle
one,
others?
they belittle others.
Yes.
They're constantly aggrandizing themselves at other people's expense.
Oh.
They'll steal your self-esteem. They make you feel bad about yourself. And if you're a strong person that doesn't have a background in childhood of somebody being very negative and putting you down, you can still begin to have your self-esteem eroded. It's like being nibbled to death by ducks. But if you have a background of somebody who puts you down on a regular basis and now you refine them in your mate, it really can undo you.
Do you think Steve Jobs might have, in fact, been clinically a narcissist, or are you just saying with him?
Well, I don't know him well
because
enough.
he was supposed to be very difficult on all people who worked with him.
Yes.
And people
visionary.
have said that.
And they've said the same thing about Clinton. If
Oh,
you
really?
work closely
yes.
with him, he's not very friendly to the people who work.
People
who work
also
for him.
said that about Ronald Reagan, and
No
they've
kidding.
said that about a lot of people. The idea that sort of this intense, some of those positive traits, those productive traits, right, can demonstrate, and people who have worked close to them would say, those were wonderful traits to get things done, but boy, sometimes behind closed doors, and if you worked closely with them, very, very challenging and difficult moments.
Yes. And in fact, let me just give another couple of negatives or weaknesses. The over-competitiveness and over-control, isolation because they really don't engage and connect with others that well, exaggeration and lying. You remember with FDR, his wife Eleanor was always correcting him when he would elaborate on things, and he was very
He's a
resentful.
narcissist, too?
Yes, he would be a productive narcissist.
What
as well.
presidents weren't narcissists?
Well, that might be
Okay, you
worth
got-
Well, we
exploring.
can find narcissistic
Eisenhower, maybe,
features in
or-
all, maybe. I don't
You think,
know. Maybe
okay,
in many.
how about Bush, too? Was he a narcissist?
Well, he's been discussed as example, but he may be other. He may be more obsessive, and
Right.
I'm not sure.
So
I hope his
Certainly.
dad wasn't
I
a
was just going to
narcissist.
say, so to your question, Dick, I think Bush 1, actually, I think perhaps there were features, but I think as we've seen over time and watched him continue the public eye, one would say he demonstrates a great deal of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
He's able to show how he's able to work with others and be collaborative in nature, has a real sense of compassion. Those are features, right, that would balance out some of the narcissistic features. One would probably not conclude at that level that he would be diagnostically deemed a narcissistic personality disorder.
Are you talking about Bush 1 or
Yes,
2?
Bush 1.
And
Bush 1.
FDR,
Yeah, and he was a gentleman.
Yeah, he-
FDR bringing in Social Security and all
Sure.
these
Yeah,
things.
they changed the world.
Yeah.
They have vision. I mean, they can be. So many of our best leaders are productive narcissists.
Wow.
And maybe this is the point to talk about another way to think about narcissism, kind of as a vulnerable versus invulnerable kind of types. We were talking about, this takes us back a ways, but the Iran-Contra back in 1987. If you think of Oliver North, right, and if you remember sort of him, and during the trials and when he would be interviewed, to me he presents as a vulnerable narcissist in the sense that he really wanted people to believe him. He had this earnest desire, this insecurity. Please believe me. I'm credible. I want my image to be sustained even during this really tarnishing time.
And he was the romantic hero type of guy, was always needing adulation from others, and we felt that he would have plunged into a depression if he didn't get the country really rallying to him.
So that's an example of a vulnerable narcissist.
But remember his boss.
Poindexter, right? By contrast, Poindexter, I would say, was an invulnerable, in the sense that... He
was a godlike character who didn't answer to anybody, not even the president. And
didn't
he
care.
Just listened to himself, and he could care less what other people thought. He was it. And that was another form of narcissism. You're talking about the invulnerable.
That's right.
Does this relate to when you said they make their own rules?
Yes. Yeah, they're not tied into doing the right thing or the conventional thing.
And so if you think about, if you go back and watch those televised trials, Poindexter, right, he presents very much what you just said, makes his own rules, and very much stands up there in the idea of, I did what I did, I'm not making apologies for it because it's what I made. Right. Oliver North, by the other hand, very much presented as, I was doing what I was told. I was trying to think of the American people. I was trying to do the right thing. And you believe me, don't you?
He wanted to be loved and everything. Now, you mentioned about O.J. Simpson, something that came out in the news lately.
What was that?
Well, so this week, it was just interesting as I was knowing we were going to come talk, that he, he's in prison, right? Yes. And a recent article I read was that he was caught stealing cookies in prison. And he had hidden away 12, I think it was oatmeal cookies in his jacket on the way back to his cell, which is forbidden, apparently. It's against the rules. And he got caught. And what I found astounding when I was reading the article is I had a great sense of just sadness and empathy for this man who, as we've all watched him sort of decline over the years in society's image and this kind of great man reduced, that he... when he rose up against being caught, he was so indignant, and the sense of entitlement, and how dare you question me about these cookies? Don't you know who I am? And I thought, boy, there again, he would be classified as someone who demonstrates high as a narcissist. That's the embodiment of narcissism. Yes, that even here in prison.
And reality is what he says it is, and the rules are his to make, and who is he to have to conform to?
Does the narcissistic personality disorder person get married less than the average person?
No. Not at all. In fact, because they can be very productive, very generous, they can make lots of money. I've got one where the husband makes $460,000 a year and the wife, an attorney, doesn't make nearly as much. And one day she said, I've got a trial coming, honey, would you please take care of supper tonight, meaning order it in or carry out or whatever. He said, no, that's your job. And she said, why is that my job? And he said, because I make more money than you do. And she wept when she told me that story, even though she's quite a tough woman. But she's been constantly put down and seen as not equal to him. And that's the main thing about narcissism, is they don't regard other people as equal to them. You are not their equal, and they'll let you know about it.
Wouldn't you learn that when you're dating them?
Well, so I was going to say, so let's go back to when we're first meeting people, and our best traits often are the ones that we see first, right? And so you can imagine some of these things we've been discussing would be things that would be a natural draw. That those would be very attractive qualities for people. And so I think sometimes we're sort of caught up in that moment of seeing the best in people when we're dating, and it isn't until later on, perhaps after a marriage has been secured and maybe as kids have come or whatnot, that you begin to see some of these traits really present in ways that can be conflictual for the marriage or the family.
Also, because there's a big focus on looking good and maintaining an image and so on, which is so key in this problem, that some of them have been on their best behavior during the dating process, and it's only on the night of your honeymoon, the first night after you've been married, you find out who you married.
Oh my God!
That's a terrible shock.
And so
because you may get the first real rage, you know, and
that's right.
And
people
often they hold that in for a year or 2 years.
It's about looking good. It's about that. That's a strong trait. Can you imagine? And so you said, do they get married less? No. Do they probably get married more often? I'm thinking yes, because it can be difficult, right? It can be difficult to stay in a relationship.
And they can be charming. They're in love with themselves, and it's very easy for them to get other people to see them like they see themselves. And if you think about it, the ordinary person is filled with doubt and indecision and confusion, and when they see somebody who's so sure of himself that he must be right, it's a comfort and an attraction for many people.
I was going to suggest that men would fall for this more than women, because men are suckers for good looks. I mean, when you look at studies and what attracts men to women, it looks as number one. With women, it's all kinds of personality things that attract. So I would think men would be dumber about not seeing this than women.
Hard to say. I'm not sure. I don't know of any
But
studies
then women
that
like
bear that
strong
out.
men.
Women
and,
do.
and men who make a lot of money and so on, and have
A sense of
prestige,
power.
and may be very accomplished, actually.
If you look at this 1% of the population who are NPDs, are they more successful than the average person?
Probably just in the sense that they pour themselves in with tremendous sense of mission, and they do have vision, and they're not constrained by doing what's right or having to care about other people that they leave. They're not worried about the aftermath of what they leave behind.
So
they're freer than most of us to do what they want to do and pursue their vision.
I think you just answered my next question, which is, are they unhappy or just make the others around them unhappy?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I think generally we would say that they make the people around them unhappy. Now, people have said, can you have a therapeutic relationship with someone who has NPD, right? How do they do in therapy?
Yeah.
And I think what we've learned and what we see is that if you can find a time where their vulnerability has been struck in the sense of something has occurred or they've come up in a place in their life where something is causing them to either look bad or
There's been a major failure or a loss, and their image has crumbled. And then that can be dire at those times. They could kill themselves once the image crumbles.
And there's your moment as a therapist. Yeah. There's your hook to try and connect with them on that level to figure out sort of how they got to that point, what's not working about them. If somebody who's a narcissist walks into your office and that's not the case, you're not going to have very good success with therapy.
Let me give you an example of a man who came with his wife for therapy, and the wife's dream, which she presented in the first session, was that she was going before a judge who was going to decide whether she was sane or insane. And this was because the husband had been driving her crazy, and she was the nut he was bringing in. And this was a man who would take his wife and 2 kids and drive station to station. He wouldn't stop for pit stops, no drinking, no peeing, nothing. And I had to say to him, why would you make your wife and children feel helpless? Why not make them feel great? But he didn't care what they felt, and it wasn't what the wife would, what the effect was on the wife and kids. That didn't matter. But what really got him to stay with me is that he was 35 years old with an MBA, and he was not succeeding in business. He was being passed over for promotion. And his younger brother was an orthopedic surgeon who was out stripping him in income and in professional success and so on, and that hurt him. And I had to address that and show him how some of his behavior and his obnoxious behavior and so on was counterproductive, was hurting him in his professional success. And then he worked with me to gain some expertise from me as to how he could better understand and be successful. But it wasn't because he cared about his impact on his wife or his kids.
But if someone lacks empathy, compassion, can therapy help the person acquire those things?
Yes. Absolutely.
If they come at the right, if you get them at the right time.
They have to be opened up. When they're opened up.
Yeah.
And then you help them to see that, boy, they had been putting all their energies into maintaining an image.
Right.
And then when that crumbled, boy, look at this. And you had to get them to be able to self-accept as a person like other persons, not perfect, and that we're all works in progress, and that every human being alive is a mixture of rational and irrational, childish and mature, what works and what doesn't work. There's nobody on earth who is totally mature, effective and rational, and that one lifetime isn't enough to get us there. And then so you're beginning to get them to understand that they're neither better nor worse than others. They've got everything in them that anybody else has, and that type of thing. It's a shift toward what they've been missing is equality with others.
So an example to kind of illustrate that I had a client a number of years ago when he came to me, and he was still in his late 20s now. He had ended his second marriage. He had changed careers 3 times. His family had really kind of alienated themselves from him. So he was coming and presenting all this stuff and couldn't understand for the life of him what was wrong with everybody else. Why were these people being so difficult in his life? Because nothing was wrong with him. And really, I thought, gosh, am I going to be able to work with this person to help? Where's my in to help him see what it was? And what it was a colleague of his had just published a book. And he felt that person wasn't nearly as smart, as creative, as good as he was. And he was angry that he hadn't published that book. And that was why he was in. It wasn't for all those other reasons. He wanted to come in literally to talk to me. I said, can I help you? I want to figure out how I can publish the book that my colleague just did because mine is better.
Yeah, see that, and the thing is, what you can then be able to see, that maybe you see that he had never established himself as a steady worker.
That's right.
And for all his talents and gifts, the little tortoises could just go along the steady workers and exceed the talented person that like.
By the way, aren't you too afraid if you talk about cases that people are going to sue you for talking about them?
Well, that's why we don't talk about anything immediate, you know. So.
Oh, these are
all past cases. Years ago.
Good.
And I'm always more comfortable when we can talk about characters from literature and show the examples which everybody has.
But I feel inclined to say that person I just spoke of, he stayed in therapy with me for over 2 years and really was very successful. He really turned things around, and so, I mean, there's a success story there.
And let me say this, that narcissism is reduced in somebody as they develop an interest in other people and a caring for other people and can learn how to love, to get past their own nose and to see people as they are and not as they need them to be.
Is there a lot of self-acceptance here where you no longer have to be perfect to be okay?
Yes. That's crucial.
That's right.
So perfectionism is part
to
of
get
narcissism.
Get beyond image building to investing in the self, in your true self, in who you are, not in the image that you're portraying. That it's not all about looking good. And this is what they don't understand about therapy frequently. They come in, they think it's all about looking good. So one woman recently sent a letter to her husband, very critical, and then wanted to copy me on it, and he didn't want her to do that. And I said, I think you're entitled to copy me on a letter you wrote, whether he wants you to or not, and talk to him, let him know that unless he has a very compelling reason, you're going to send this to me. And a shame or embarrassment is not sufficient, because this is a therapy where everything has to come out, and she doesn't trust him with good reason to tell the whole story. And she said, well, thanks, that's good advice. I'll let him know, and I'll do that.
The etiology of narcissism. Why are some people, is it just biology?
We really don't know that well, except that part of it is biology.
We do know that.
And we know that it can be identification with a narcissistic parent.
And we've talked.
But I'm sorry, just one other thing is that no study has shown that it's a result of an adverse childhood.
That's right. And right, that's exactly right. And we can also say that, we know that studies will say by the time of age 5, the personality is largely being able to be identified. And so, one of the questions is, can you identify narcissism in a child? And yes, you can.
In fact, there are 3 books on personality disorders
So how would
children.
How would a parent know that their child has got this?
Right. Well, demonstrating some of the same features we've talked about, right? And to the extreme beyond just what normal development looks like. Now, what's encouraging about that, I think, is that if you have informed parents and people who are willing to identify that and go with that, I think there's great hope in working with a child with narcissism, because children are malleable, and you can teach someone empathy. You can teach them and model and work with them to get some of those demonstrated traits across. And I think there's great hope in reforming and working with that, because again, we don't want to reduce anyone to just their pathology, right? And so I think that's really exciting, actually, the idea that we can work with children in such a way that we can mold that differently, and there's great hope for them.
You're talking about the therapist or the parent working with the child?
Yes and yes.
Both.
Both. It requires both, doesn't it?
But you were saying you really have to kind of hit bottom, like alcoholism, before you turn yourself in.
For the adults.
For the adults, not for children. Not for children. They don't have to hit bottom.
They don't?
No. No.
Because they care about adult approval, or?
Well, yes, that, and because they aren't fully formed yet, they again, the demonstration of symptomology might be, able to be seen differently in a child.
And you can help them to early on to make sense of why they may repel their peers and how they're how being such hard losers and how that is affects other people
and how they can change that.
I'll bet you've had couples in couples counseling where one person is a narcissist.
Yes.
How does that go?
Okay.
Well,
go ahead. You want to?
Yeah. So I think yes, we have seen that, and I know for myself, I've worked with some spouses of people who are narcissistic, and I think what it requires to stay loving these people in a relationship with them, it requires you to understand your own sense of what David Snarch would call your 4 points of balance, which is really the idea of how can you understand to take care of yourself, love them sometimes from a distance is what I call it. And the idea that just because they say something doesn't make it true. Just because they say to you, you're this, that, and the other, or denigrate you, doesn't make it so. But it requires a sense of working with someone to help them understand that they can be for themselves and for their partner, but they don't have to buy into or accept what the narcissist partners
that
think.
doesn't seem morally right to me. Here's this person who's being really unpleasant, nasty, hurtful, unempathetic, and you're saying, well, learn how to dance with that versus that person.
Well, it's more speaking from the best in oneself to the best in the other, and to see if you can bring about a change in the other through your own change. And through holding on to yourself, not that you're going to be a punching bag.
Right.
And if you just take the abuse and roll over, that just reinforces it, and that they think they can beat up on
So
you.
are you saying a partner, you can change your partner just by being coached by a therapist how to change them?
Totally. I've had couples where the husband, for example, never condescended to come in.
Right.
I never saw him in several years of therapy. I never saw him. Only years later did I run into them, and I met the husband for the first time, and they had become best friends.
Wow.
But the husband had changed tremendously only by the wife coming in for both. And the wife had no problem except to learn how to partner with somebody as difficult.
And so you coached her how to cope and how to create change.
Yes.
And how to be for herself. The idea, the sense of, being responsible for your own sense of self-worth, your own sense of self-love, and the idea that that comes from within you first, of course.
Yeah, and you tell her, in effect, you don't turn yourself over to anybody.
Yes.
Nobody defines you. You know who you are.
Yes.
And you can listen to what he says about you to learn about him.
I have heard, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So,
I have heard that the narcissists are the most difficult of all clients to treat.
I don't think so.
I don't agree
The
with
more
that.
it depends. If especially the productive narcissists are kind of fun to work with, and of course, if they've taken a hit, then they're more accessible, and you can do more with them. But to me, the most difficult people to treat are the dependent, passive ones that will not claim their life as their own, and will not take initiative, and they're just there to go along for the ride, and you're trying to get them into the driver's seat so that you can be in the shotgun yourself as a therapist, and get them to take risks and strive. The narcissists are exciting because they are taking risks all over the place, and they're doing the productive ones are out there.
And I think as a therapist, what Jim and I have talked about, the idea that you need to find something within them that you can identify with, that you can join with them on. If they walk in your door and you already are set to kind of explain to them everything that's wrong about that, you've lost them from the get-go. You need to find something, just like you would with every client, you need to find something in them that you can identify with that says we have that
to
in
the
common.
best in them.
Right.
Absolutely.
Let's go with that and see what makes sense. And then you got them.
And it reminds me of how Freud once said that psychotherapy is like the reclamation of the Zuider Zee. The Dutch people took back the sea, the land from the sea with their dikes and so on. You get people who come in, they're swamped with their emotions and so on. You have to start with what's solid in them,
Right,
strengths,
that's right.
and build on those.
And speak to
take
that.
Back.
Yes,
take back the land.
So you can't take out your DSM-5 and say, look, you're a narcissistic personality. Look, you have aren't these all 9 your characteristics?
Well, you can, and I'm guessing that you won't get very far with that, because they're going to say, and so what's the problem with that?
Works for me.
Yeah, what's the problem with that?
Yeah, right,
Wow.
right.
Anything else we should know before we close that we haven't covered?
Well, so one thing I wanted to note that I just found of interest when I was researching this, and I was looking for some support services to recommend for people for resources. What struck me was I had a very difficult time finding any kind of support group or resource for people who identify as a narcissist, and I found one. And it is online, and it's a blog. It's a Facebook blog. And I went on and I read it, and it was really interesting. And if you think that you might be a narcissist, I recommend you go on and look at it. And just to read firsthand of what people who identify as narcissists are writing about themselves. It's not professionally, it's just a Facebook one. I found that really interesting.
How do they find it?
Well, it's on Facebook. It's called a Narcissistic Personality Disorder Support Group on Facebook.
Okay.
And it's very telling that you only found one,
I found one.
because this is the hardest orientation to discover in yourself.
Right.
There's so much self-delusion.
And that's what I was going to say. That's why.
You recognize it.
But I found a ton of resources for people who are living with and connecting to people who identify as narcissists, including there's a narcissist abuse recovery website that people can Google that, and plus there are support groups in local communities for people who identify as I'm in a partnership or a relationship with someone who's a narcissist. But I just found it interesting. I only found one for people who are narcissists.
Well, thanks for that.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank Lesa and Jim for filling us in on
Sure.
this very interesting discussion.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks.
very much, Dave.
And I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.